Welcome to another episode of the Becca a Management Scientist podcast. This is chapter 4. This is actually going to be a two-parter. The second part I'm actually going to be recording with my good friend Renee. Just decided to do it next week. I had my booster shot and have had some, we've both had some crazy schedule timing things. So we're going to record the second part of this next week. So this, I'm going to go ahead and give out, obviously the chapter title is Why is it criminal? And I'm going to go ahead and give a trigger warning into this because this topic is very sensitive. It's not only going to talk about drug use and overdose, it's also going to talk about self-harm and even can touch on suicidal tendencies. So I want to give out a trigger warning at the beginning because I don't want anyone, if any of these are triggering to anyone, I don't want, this to, cause any kind of distress. If you have PTSD for things like this, I don't, I don't want to cause any kind of distress. So I am very much going to give out a trigger warning about this episode. So it is, sorry, I had to get the cat down. It is something that is very much needing to be discussed. And what we kind of decided to talk about was why is, self-harm to the point of, life endangerment something that is treated medically, but for addicts, when they overdose, it is treated through the criminal justice system. So it's treated criminally. And it is a very important topic because both are mental health issues, but one is criminal and the other is considered medical. And so what I thought I would do in this first part to kind of give an introduction to it is talk about what really started this criminalization of drug use. It goes into, obviously selling, buying, all that kind of stuff. But I kind of wanted to give a more political aspect to it, whereas Renee, who is a licensed therapist, is going to give, a much more she's going to give, a medical more on the mental health side, her opinions, but also facts. She's incredibly intelligent. I can't say enough good things about her. Obviously, that's why we are such good friends, but she is going to give her opinions on, the medical side of it, the mental health side of it. I touch on that, but this is a topic that's very sensitive. If it is something that could trigger you, by all means, feel free to listen. Maybe not listen to the next two topics or the next two episodes, this episode and the next episode, but we'll have, after Christmas, I'll have, I'm going to actually start some episodes on not only religion, LGBTQ, but also on the gender construct and body positivity and, ageism and things like that. That all kind of goes into, mental health and different things. So, should I drink my drink? Forgive me. But so to really get this started, as to why it is criminal, what is considered criminal, you really have to expect in this country, you really kind of have to go back. It really starts with the Reagan administration and his quote unquote war on drugs. But he actually derived that from the Nixon administration, who started, it was called the Comprehensive Crime Control Act of 1970. Reagan's was of 1984, and then again, I think in 1986. But, you know, it was really a crackdown on the possession of, or the possession with the intent to sell, you know, different kinds of drugs, different controlled substances. And really what Nixon did was kind of, they came up with, kind of around this time, they came up with the Controlled Substances Act, which kind of put drugs in different categories. It organized them into different, you know, how addictive it was, like the addiction potential, and then what it could be used for medically. So with that, when I did my episode on the opioid epidemic, I talked about how, you know, really in the 70s, prescription drugs were very hard to get your hands on, because they really only prescribed them to terminal cancer patients, because they had this long list of criteria before you could ever get prescribed a prescription painkiller, an opioid. But the big drugs that, you know, were in the 70s were obviously, you know, it was crack and cocaine, even into the 80s. I mean, you know, obviously in the 60s, that it was LSD and acid, and but it really got cracked down on in Nixon's. And then Jimmy Carter really didn't, it wasn't part of his policies. That, you know, he really didn't make the war on drugs part of his policies. That happened when it went back to Reagan. And then, you know, obviously after Reagan, there was the first Bush, who kind of continued with it. And then it was lessened during Clinton's administration. And obviously these are along party lines. But that being said, with Reagan, it was 100% racially motivated, because the original Crime Act actually made the harsh penalties for people who were in possession of marijuana, which, as we know, is not a hard drug, not a gateway drug. It's not any of that. So it was completely racially motivated. You know, during this time, there was a lot of the riots, you know, after it was Rodney King beating, all that. So there was heightened, like there has been now, there was a lot of heightened racial tension, and this crackdown was a huge part of the racial tension, because not only were they getting arrested and having these very harsh like sentences and fines for marijuana, but it was a harsher penalty for crack than it was for cocaine. And the reason that it was a harsher penalty for crack than it was for cocaine was because it was rich white people using cocaine, and it was the poorer African American, you know, like Black and brown people using crack. And someone mentioned, in looking all this stuff up with Reagan's policy, it was really a policy against, you know, immigrants too. It was very like, you know, again, racially motivated. So, you know, they thought, oh, well, they're smuggling in drugs from Mexico. And it's like, obviously Latin American countries is what they thought. They thought, you know, Colombia, Mexico. in which some of these drugs were coming from there. I mean, obviously, you know, you look at the history, there were drug kingpins that lived in these countries, but you also have to look at who was buying it. And it's the rich white community that was buying a lot of these. And because they weren't selling it, they were buying it, their penalties were less. So yeah, it was 100% racially motivated. So, like I said, during the Reagan administration, they came up with, Nancy Reagan came up with this whole just say no program. And then obviously if you were in school in the late 80s, early 90s, which I was, you may have had the DARE program come in, which was just part of, the criminal justice reform on drugs. So kids would just say no. During this time was when that, heightened scares of, oh, watch out for your kids going trick-or-treating because there's going to be drugs and candy. It's like they say now, nobody's going to give their drugs away. Nobody's going to put drugs and candy for kids. They're not going to do it. But yeah, so this whole program came about, as a way for kids to just say no, don't use drugs, don't get mixed in with the wrong kind of people. Again, racially motivated. So this is what really started the this criminalization of, well, it's really a criminalization of addiction. Because yes, not only was it punishing the people who were in possession of with the intent to sell, but it was also, would punish the people who were in possession of the drugs. And, again, even if, there was a person who was white and had, was in possession of cocaine, they were still getting some form of punishment. But this is when they begin to criminalize addiction, and it was seen as just a party choice. It was seen as just, they don't want to have a legitimate way to make money, so they're selling it. It was seen as, again, a choice. It wasn't seen as a mental health issue. It wasn't seen as a disease. It wasn't seen as we need to have legitimate ways to help these people get off drugs. It was, let's just slap a fine and throw them in jail. And, slapping a fine on a person and throwing them in jail, first of all, while they're in jail, it's very dangerous, especially if they've been, addicted for a very long period of time. It's very dangerous to have someone go through a forced withdrawal without any other chemical inhibitor. Like, you cannot just cold turkey quit certain drugs because it can kill you. Like, the detoxing process can kill you. And throwing a person into jail, they have what's called the DTs. If this jail, like a local jail, even some federal prisons, if they're not equipped, and they were not in the 80s when this first began, if they're not equipped to handle someone's detoxing, that's, that's people who are going to overdose and die, or who are going to die from the withdrawal while they're in federal, state, local, penitentiaries. And I don't want to say that prisons have gotten better. I'm sure they have. Obviously, they have now are more adept to deal with overdoses and people going through withdrawal. But, again, then at that time they didn't. And so this was kind of what brought us to the topic of, why is it criminal? Now that, especially when 2016 happened and the Surgeon General came out and said, addiction is a disease, it's a mental health issue. Why is it still, if a person is using to the point where they are about to overdose, even if they're given Narcan, why is it still a criminal issue and not put on a psych hold in a hospital issue? Why is it not treated like that? Why is it not treated like a medical mental health emergency? Why is it treated as a criminal issue? And it really does. It takes its, the core root of it back to, that comprehensive crime control, the act of 1984 and 1986. It's still, I would like to say it's a work in progress and they're going to get better about it, but it's not. I want to say it's not, but I want to say it also has to do with the administration that's in place. Because if you look at it, things were lessened when, there was a Democratic administration in place. And people can say what they want. Obviously, like I said, it went through Reagan. Bush had his issues. People can say what they want about Bill Clinton. Yes, he was impeached for lying under oath for having inappropriate relations with someone who wasn't his wife. But in the 8 years that Bill Clinton was in office, our economy was at the best it had ever been. And there was this overwhelming sense of that he actually cared about his, the United States as a whole. It was the same, Obama kind of got handed a shit show from the previous administration, because what people don't want to see is during the previous administration, there were things like, and it shows again a racial, how the racial divide is. There was this housing crisis that started because there were no restrictions on predatory lending. This is a whole nother issue, but I will feed this into why is this criminal. There was a whole, predatory lending was available. Anyone who, even if you didn't have credit, you had bad credit, whatever, you could get loans. And it didn't matter if you paid them off or not. And so this market crashed. And, during that time, people like Madoff, all these people on Wall Street were rolling it in. There are several movies out there about before the housing, market crashed and all these people that were making money. And it was all the people who were probably still, from the 80s were still doing, cocaine and all of that. But there was always a fall guy. And it's, that's how it works. That's how white privilege works. Let's just call it what it is. That's how white privilege works. If you were white at that time, you basically got a slap on the wrist and there was no consequences. However, if you were Black or brown, not only was there gentrification happening during that time, and you were getting pushed into even crappier parts of the city to live, but you were still getting these harsh, for possession of marijuana, you were still getting these harsh, criminal sentences. When Obama came into office, yes, there was a lot of things that he had promised and wanted to change, but what you have to understand is when you have to clean up the mess of the previous administration, it's very hard to get back to what you want to get done. That kind of has to sit on a back burner because you have to clean up the mess of the administration before. He inherited a war. He inherited this housing market, just destruction, and several handfuls of other problems that he was handed. So that's part of the reason why he couldn't get all of, what he wanted to get done, although he did get a lot of things. And, obviously the Obamacare, the Affordable Health Care Act had its issues, but it's a step in the right direction. Because yes, I will say it, I am a very huge proponent for universal health care. I think it's needed, especially for things like this, especially for addiction recovery, for mental health, for those who are poverty stricken, that are suffering, you know, with that maybe have cancer, who need insulin. Like, it's needed. But then you go into this next cycle and you get a president like Donald Trump, who only cared about one thing, and that was himself. He only cared about himself. He opened the door for people to be openly racist and toxic and bigoted, and again caused that tension in the racial lines, and, you know, could have put back into play these really harsh penalties for people who, you know, were in possession of things like marijuana, even though now we see that, you know, marijuana is becoming legalized, because obviously, again, it's not a hard drug. It's a natural thing. And you know, medically, it's done wonders. However, during his 4 years, he had spoken with some of the families that, you know, were dealing with this opioid crisis, and yet nothing, you know, nothing was done. He allowed Big Pharma to, you know, raise their prices. Like, it just wasn't a good situation. He looked out for himself. So now, with this newest administration in, they're looking for ways to lessen the price of insulin. You know, hopefully we can get to a point where we can get back to the discussion of addiction as a mental health issue, and lessen the effects of the criminal justice system being the ones to deal with addicts who are overdosing. Or, you know, the aftermath, that instead of them going to, you know, a ward in the hospital where they can be put on a psych hold for so many hours, instead of it being treated again as a mental health issue like it is with those who are, you know, practicing self-harm, or those who are, you know, mentally at the point of, you know, potentially committing suicide. It is treated as, you know, a mental health medical issue. Whereas when a person overdoses to the point of doing the same thing, it's a criminal issue. And so that's why I base this one as, why is it criminal? And again, it is because it's not something that has been, it's something that started out as, there was this scare about drugs, but it was also, again, racially motivated. And the only way that the administrations knew how to deal with it was through the criminal justice system. And instead of really looking into why there was this continuous like influx of drugs and why people were using them, instead of looking into it again as, you know, a disease or as a mental health issue, it was just, oh, it's a party thing. Let's get it off the street by arresting these people. And, you know, by eventually trying to get, you know, the FBI and the CIA to go after people like Pablo Escobar, or, you know, the cartel that was running the drugs from South America. Whereas if it would have gotten treated as, again, if it would have gotten treated as what it is a disease, as a mental health addiction or mental health issue, we could have combated it in a way here that would have lessened, you know, people actually going out and buying it, or people going out and using it. But instead it was, we're gonna throw you in jail. We're gonna put this hefty fine on you. We're gonna put you in jail. If it happens again, it's gonna be a federal, you know, issue. Like, if people were caught, they had the whole 3 strikes you're out. If people were caught multiple times, it could lead up to like life in prison for possession of marijuana. I mean, that's not the only thing, and I'm not trying to lessen the effects of, in all of this, I'm not trying to lessen the effects of what drugs do, or how drugs affect people in their everyday life, or how bad it can be for a person, to be addicted. I'm not trying to lessen that, and I'm not, trying to say that, like certain people who are addicts have done things that are wrong, but it's all part of this. There's something much deeper going on, not just the drug use and not just the addiction. There's something more going on. And if we can get to the root of the problem and not just put a Band-Aid over it and fix the symptom, but we can fix the whole cause, then I think that we're going to be able to lessen the amount of drugs that are out there that we can maybe potentially stop someone from ever using in the first place. Or if they do use, we can catch it very early on. But it's also just opening up a conversation and talking to the addict like they're a human being, finding out what has gone on in their life before to get them to this point. Because, a lot of the times there could be some sort of childhood trauma, whether that be the loss of a parent, whether that be how, like, were they abused by a parent physically or emotionally abused by a parent? Was it something in school that they were bullied, that they were, treated differently, or something in school that kind of threw off this, started this, mental health decline, and it, started off the chemical imbalance to have them to start to use in the first place. Because a lot of the times when you start to use, it's because you either don't want to feel something, or you don't want to feel something, you want to suppress it and you want to make it go away, or you're depressed and you want that to go away and you want to feel happy and you want to feel up and you want to do this, you want to do that. And, like, it can be any of that starts the downward spiral into addiction. And if more places would treat it as, again, as a mental health issue and not as something criminal, we wouldn't have as many overdoses. We wouldn't have as many drugs on the street. They would be able to combat someone who is taking prescription pain pills if they start to see, if they're taking a thorough history and they start to see this, oh, they're still needing to use it, and probably, we shouldn't be writing another prescription for it. If they could see that, we would have less people addicted to prescription opioids. With that being said, people who can't get their hands on the prescription opioids that are going for the heroin, that is cheaper for them to get, but giving them the same, if not more of an effect that the prescription opioids are giving them. Like, we could lessen that. If people would start showing more compassion, even something like I said before about a needle exchange program, even showing that just small bit of human compassion for this person who has been using can open up the door to start a conversation to help them maybe get off of this. Because if you show you care enough to say, hey, I realize that you're still using, even though I wish you wouldn't. Here is this, so you're not getting anything else. So you're not opening yourself up to something more dangerous that could wreck your life even more. Opening up places like, I want to see these, halfway houses, or these like centers where somebody can talk to somebody, come and talk to them for free, because that's what I want to offer to them, is a place to come and talk to someone for free. But a place where it's not going to be, you're being completely judged for being on these drugs, but hey, let's figure out what's going on to why you still need to take them. Like, I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to judge you for taking them, but I want to figure out why. And I want to figure out what we can do to help you get off of them. If they were treated with any form of dignity, then we wouldn't have as much of it going on. Yes, there's still going to be some, because there are still going to be people, there's bad seeds everywhere. And there are still going to be people who are going to take it just because they want to take it, and because they want to have fun. And I mean, still, not to lessen whether or not that they have a mental health issue, but I'm saying, like, there's still going to be those people. Again, I'm not forgiving everything that addicts can do, because there are some who have done they've committed terrible, horrible things. But if there is a conversation before it gets to that point, if there's, any sort of conversation to get to why they're putting themselves in the situation that they're in, why they're using, what makes them need to use, what is going on in their brain, maybe those things wouldn't happen. Again, there are some people that are predisposed to just be awful, and the drugs aren't even really a part of it. They were just, even though they were taking them, these people were predisposed to be awful. But for most, I think if we, again, could show some empathy and some compassion, and figure out what in their life has maybe led them to this place that they're in, with no judgment, we could force it out of the criminal justice system, and we wouldn't have this overload of people in jail for things like this. Jail would be strictly for the people who are actually committing horrible crimes, but this is, the whole conversation around this is, why is it still criminal? Why, if this person is in so much pain that they're getting to the point of overdose, why isn't it treated the same way as a person who is in pain that's not on drugs but is self-harming to that point? And again, this is not to lessen anyone that is self-harming. This isn't to state, that they don't, it's in no way to lessen what they have to say that addicts are, more needy of this. They're needing this more, at all, because, if you are at that point, obviously if you're self-harming, there is a mental health issue. Especially if you're getting to the point of where, you feel like you want to take your own life, whether that be from self-harm or whether that be from, addiction, whether you're at the point where you kind of want to end it all. Please just know, I know that there may not be a lot of listeners for this, but if you are out there and you are at that point, please just know that your life is still worth it. You are still someone that's needed. You're still someone that should be here. You're worthy to be here. You're worthy to have your, to have your mental health evaluated again without judgment. And obviously, I will also stick this in the description box. But the please, if you are to that point, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, the phone number is 1-800-273-8255. And again, it's 1-800-273-8255. Please call that. I typically leave my email on the YouTube channel, but I'll state it in here too. It's just managementscientistpod@gmail.com. Please feel free to email that. If you need someone to talk to, please call the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. I also know that there's one that was just started for those who are in the transgender community as well. But again, please open up that conversation and know that you're worthy to be here, and that there is someone here that is willing to listen to you, that people want you to still be here. But again, none of this was to ever lessen what somebody who is going through that and why they're going through that, to lessen that and to say that an addict is worthy of, maybe they need it more. It's not to say that. It's to say that they're needed at the same. They're both needed to be medical issues. They're both needed to be treated, in earnest as a mental health emergency, rather than one being medical and the other being criminal. That is the whole point of this, is to say that, overdosing should not be a criminal act, because there is a reason that person got to that point, and it's a very scary reason, and they really need the help that they're not going to get in prison, they're not going to get in the county jail, that they're not going to get from sleeping overnight. Even like alcoholics, this whole drunk take thing. Yes, alcoholism it's a little different than drug dependence addiction, but it's also a mental health issue. And no, that does not excuse anyone that drives drunk, especially now that there are things like Ubers. Never, if you have drank anything, please do not drink and drive. But this whole putting them in a drunk tank and just letting them sit there to sober up and go on about their way the next day isn't helpful either. They need to be put in some sort of, therapy to help figure out why they were drinking in the first place. Again, all of this boils down to it's really all just it's a mental health issue. It's a disease. It's a mental health issue, and it needs to be treated as such, versus this whole criminalization of it. Again, and it was, in the beginning, it was, drawn on racial lines, but it's, when you look at everything that has happened, recently, like since opioids were introduced and the prescription opioids were introduced, it's not a racial issue. It's, some of it is a poverty issue, but it's not a racial issue. And, again, like I said, 100%, I think addiction needs to be treated as a mental health issue, and it does not need to be handled through the criminal justice system. It needs to be handled through, psychological evaluations, through that form of therapy, and, places, recovery centers need the resources they need, help to get, more therapists in place, to have, more medical supplies in place, to have beds, to have places to put these people, when they come in, that sort of thing. But again, it's, a mental health issue. And again, if you need someone to call or talk to, please call. If you are to that point, please call the Suicide Prevention Hotline. Again, I left my email in this. Feel free to send a message and maybe I can point you in the right direction. but we will talk about part 2. We'll actually go into more of the mental health with my friend Renee. She's going to go more into the mental health portion of it, especially with self-harm, and kind of give her opinions. And we will do that one next week. So again, I'll give the same trigger warning next week when we start to discuss these things. I try not to go into a whole lot of details because most of you know what goes on, during an overdose, or knows how people are getting drugs and how they're using them. So this isn't really like a how-to, but it's just a informative, like, this is why this shouldn't be this. Yes, some of it is my opinion, but some of it is something that the conversation needs to be started to end the stigma, because these people deserve a chance to overcome this. And I think that when they relapse, it's because maybe they weren't given the full, the full tools to help manage their addiction. But again, the next episode will have my friend Renee in it, and we will discuss, more of the mental health side of it, more of, the what could lead people up to the point of self-harm, and also she'll be giving her opinion on why she thinks and wants to know why is it criminal versus like a medical necessity. So I will talk to you guys next time.